Welcome to Montreal, Canada. Today we're going to explore the premise that failure is much more important than success when it comes to uncovering the strategy for success. In particular, when it comes to early financial freedom. Now, if you remember correctly, I defined success very narrowly in my 0-hour work week model. And success is defined as perpetual passive cash flow that's a multiple of cash outflow. And what I'm suggesting is that you get to this success, which is early financial freedom, you're going to learn a lot more from your failures than you will from your successes. And in many ways, you've got to celebrate failure to be successful. You've seen that a lot in the Wall Street that I grew up in professionally. And you see that a lot in Silicon Valley today. It's a very unique quality in America, which is this celebration of failure. So the question is, why is that? Why is failure more important than success? And the answer is because success leads most people to confuse luck with merit. So you can't tell if you're good or lucky. And I think a lot of people are just plain lucky. So let me introduce a financial concept of beta and alpha. So beta is basically the market. It's as if you bought everything in the market. And alpha is the ability to outperform the market. Now, when all ships are rising because the tide has come in, that's kind of your beta. It doesn't tell you whether you're a good investor or a bad investor, because a moron could have just gone long, which is bought an asset that goes up and just stuck with it, right? So I'm going to give you 3 examples of people who I've met and are an exemplar of this premise that failure is more important than success. So the first one is Jim Rogers. So Jim Rogers is this billionaire hedge fund guy, and he's interesting because he was one of the first hedge funds that was created in, I got a noisy family here behind me, I apologize. He was one of the first hedge fund guys. So the concept of a hedge fund is you go long and short, which means that everybody talks about buying, but there's a way of making money when asset prices fall, and that strategy is called shorting. So they were one of the first people to go both long and short, so that you made money in down markets as well as up markets. So he was of that tradition. So I had the pleasure of meeting him. He actually lives up the street from me in the Upper West Side in Manhattan, but that's not where I met him. I met him at the Harvard Club. So we're having a couple of drinks, and I couldn't believe I'm meeting this legend. And we started talking, and I said, when you train guys based on your experience, what is kind of the way you think about training them? Like, what do you do? And he said, well, look, what I do is I give them $50 million, and I say, go lose that money. Go short something. So shorting as a strategy is much more risky than going long, especially if you use futures contracts, because you can lose an infinite amount of money versus just the money you put in. So in other words, you can lose more than the money you invest in a shorting strategy. Very dangerous. So he said, learn to short and learn to lose money. And I thought that was like a bizarre thing to say. I said, why? He goes, because once you've lost $50 million, you're going to think very carefully as to why you lost those, that capital. And you're going to be you're going to draw lessons which will help you be an investor. So his premise was, until you lose a lot of money, you can't be a good investor. Right? So that's story number one. Story number two is my friend Sanjay. So my friend Sanjay, if you remember, PhD in chemistry, thinks like a lot of PhDs because he has a PhD in one area. He's smart and therefore knows something about every area, including finance. So he was telling me the other day how smart he is, which he does quite often, because he's gone long this investment called QLD. Now, QLD is basically a leveraged Nasdaq asset. By the way, I'm not giving financial advice. These morons at FINRA would get on my case for giving financial advice. This is for educational purposes. Never do anything I talk about here. In fact, do the opposite. How's that for a disclosure? So he went long QLD, and he's made a lot of paper profits. And so he tells me how amazing he is as an investor. And the point I make with Sanjay is, we don't know how good an investor you are, because you got to go through the down markets. Show me you're making money in the down markets, and then you can tell me whether you're good or not, right? And more importantly, QLD is based off Nasdaq. Nasdaq is the market. It's beta. I want to see alpha. I don't want to see beta. I want to see outperformance. On a risk-adjusted basis, have you outperformed? Now, he still doesn't understand this concept of risk-adjusted. Namely, if you're going to compare an apple to an apple, you got to be unit of currency. The unit of currency is risk-adjusted returns. Showing me great returns, paper returns on a risky asset, is not the same as showing me returns on a low-risk asset. You got to de-risk them so you can compare. He doesn't quite understand that. So he keeps on telling me how much money he's making, paper money. Now, my point to him is my maid could do his strategy, because all he's done is bought something and held it in a 25-year bull market. Like, roughly it's a bull market for the last 25 years because money's been ridiculously cheap. And in fact, I have made my maid a millionaire, because I just told her, at the beginning of the bull market, approximately the beginning, just go buy SPY, hold it, because it's a bull market. Interest rates are low. Don't bet against the Fed. And when the Fed stops being ridiculous about super low interest rates, then you should sell. And she's used my strategy and actually put her kids through college. So the point is, my maid wouldn't say she's smart, because all she's done is got beta when the market's going up. Again, I'm not recommending SPY or not recommending SPY. It's not an investment recommendation. I'm just telling you stories. And so my point with Sanjay is that you've only seen a bull market. So you're assuming you're smart. But until you fail, you can't determine if you're smart or not. So the key to failure is, what we know with failure is that you didn't have luck. So you can now look at your failure, analyze it, and figure out what decision you made that was wrong. Which, in the theme of this channel, which is about clear thinking, is about questioning assumptions. Which assumptions did you get wrong? And by drilling into that, you improve your judgment, right? Because there's only one way to get good judgment. That is, exhibit a lot of bad judgment, and then learn from it. Let me give you a third case study. Sandy Weil. So I did my MBA at Cornell. He's a fellow Cornell guy, very generous to Cornell, so that's how I know him. I met him at a Cornell alumni event, and again, he's a legend on Wall Street. So he started a brokerage firm. He actually was a bond runner after Cornell, after his BA at Cornell. He was a bond runner at Bear Stearns, which was one of the big six investment banks when I was working at Salomon Brothers, and it subsequently kind of disappeared as a name, which is really a shame. But that's the dynamism of Wall Street. All kinds of firms over the last 250 years have gone up and down and come in and gotten lost. That's part of the dynamism. And so he basically starts being a bond runner for Bear Stearns, and then eventually starts his own brokerage company. That brokerage company is bought by Shearson. Then in 1979, Shearson buys Loeb, Rhodes, and Hornblower, and that became Shearson, which was a big investment bank and brokerage. And just as a side note, because I do, and I'm known for my digressions, Hornblower, that company, I used to work with the grandson of the Hornblower that founded Hornblower and Company sort of 3 generations ago. So I thought that was kind of an interesting anecdote. But surely I digress. So Sandy Weil goes along. He becomes the head of American Express because Shearson merged with American Express. And then he gets unceremoniously booted out. And so he's in the wilderness trying to figure out his next step. And for 2 years, he tries to become the CEO of Bank of America. So he would put together this 100-page pitch book. He'd go to the board and he would say, "This is what I'm going to do. This is the future." And they were like, "No, thank you." Now, when he got booted out of American Express, he was 52 years old. And he just spent 2 years just knocking on doors. Nothing happened. So that was his failure. So over those 2 years, he kind of figured out the mistakes he'd made and the failures he'd had. And it wasn't just a straight up and down path. He actually had a lot of failures on the way to getting booted out of Amex. And he eventually buys this ridiculous company called Commercial Credit, which was completely useless. He bought it for $7 million. And to think that a guy who ran Amex is going to buy a ridiculously unknown second-rate company like Commercial Credit is just, it was shame for him. But that's the depths to which he had sunk. So he eventually learned from his mistakes, and he took Commercial Credit, bought Transamerica. Now, was it Transamerica? He bought Major Travelers. That's what it is. He bought Travelers. Then Travelers bought Citicorp. Then Citicorp bought Salomon Brothers. And of course, Jamie Dimon, who I met at Salomon Brothers, now runs JP Morgan and is a protege. So in all 3 stories, Jimmy Rogers, what Sanjay is getting wrong, and what Sandy Weil did, you'll notice that their success was premised on their failure, right? And in the case of Sanjay, his failure is premised on his success, which is to say that only in failure can we separate luck, because you didn't have good luck, and therefore isolate what you did wrong, and isolate your decision making, and think hard in a very truthful manner, right? Radical truthfulness. Truthfulness where you're not politically correct, you're not worried about offending yourself, you're not worried about offending other people, you're just ruthlessly looking for the truth, because in the markets, you make money or you lose money. You can't BS the markets. Either you made money or you lost money. Having said that, either you have alpha or you have beta. And it's much harder to figure out if you have alpha, if the beta is rising all the time, which it pretty much has done with U.S. markets for the last 25 years. So, the takeaway. When you have your failure, embrace it. Revel in it. Celebrate it. And understand that one of the reasons America is America, one of the reasons America is the largest economy in the world, it didn't just happen. There's a culture here, and it's very different from other cultures. So like Canada, for example. I was brought up in Canada, even though I was born in India. And Canada is a mean reversion culture. That is to say, it celebrates that if you think of a distribution, a normal distribution, that central tendency is the mean, right? Is the mean and the mode are the same in a normal distribution. And Canada's all about getting into the mean. You know, they celebrate being middle class. They just love it. Now, the U.S. is not a strong mean culture. It has fat tails, which means it has a lot of poor people, has a lot of rich people. And in America, even poor people want to be rich. They don't want to be average. They want to be rich. The Horatio Alger story is not Horatio wanting to be really comfortable. The Horatio Alger story is a person who wants to be super rich. So there's less mean reversion in the U.S. than there is in other countries. You know, people just don't want to be like everybody else. In Canada, if you say, I want to be the best in the world or something, that's considered antisocial. It's one of the reasons I left Canada, because I was already the national debating champion. I was on the world circuit, ranked in the World Debating Championship circuit, eventually became a World Debating Champion finalist. And I wanted to be the best in the world at what I did. And that's just antisocial. So in America, you celebrate being the best in the world. But the flip side of that is you celebrate failure. Because most people who aim to be the best in the world don't make it. Right? And so you can't aim to be best in the world and have some shyness about risk. You have to fall flat in your face. I've had so many failures in my life. It's unbelievable. But it's from those failures. I've lost capital investing. But it's from those failures I've developed this idea of the 0-hour work week, about accumulating sips of cash flow, but not seeking capital gains, but basically becoming a lender. It's from that loss I finally figured out a very delimited goal everybody can achieve. That kind of makes sense. So if it wasn't for the failure, if I didn't lose any money, if I didn't have any failures, I don't think I'd be in my part of the journey. And as we discussed before, like a good Hindu, you believe the truth is revealed, it's not discovered. So you have an inner voice. It's called you can call it a conscience, you can call it the subconscious. You have an inner voice. You have this destiny, you have this path. We interviewed Michael from Montreal. He has a path. He has a story. And you want to uncover that story. But you can't uncover that story if you don't fail. Because part of your success is going to come from that failure. So that's the takeaway from today's video. Come visit Montreal. Honestly, it's like paradise in the summer. They have Jazz Fest, they have Comedy Fest, they have the F1 race, one of the F1 races here. It's just a fantastic place. With that, I'll see you next time.